Well, let's see. I'd sure like to have a good story for you today. Can't think of anything. Let's see what happened. I'm just gonna start rambling. Had to go to Kroger today to get my prescription. I went yesterday. Oh, it was late in the day, and I'm telling you, that store was packed. It was packed. I got up to the checkout, and you know how it is. Two clerks, all those aisles, and you only had two clerks, and they were standing about 10 deep in each aisle. Now, I just had a few things, but all the rest of the carts, of course, you know how that is, they're full up, but I didn't mind waiting my turn. I looked over, you know where the self-check counters are at one end? I'll bet the line had 30 people waiting to use those self-serve checkers, whatever you call them. It just blew my mind to think there were all those other cash registers and nobody working them. Kroger was making big money yesterday, and I was getting a little bit angry at the idea of all these customers in there, and they couldn't put any clerks on the cash registers to take care of them. Somebody needs to inform these people. That ain't right. But anyway, I had to go back today and get my prescription. Got home and I was hungry. Well, you know, when you're so hungry, you don't want to take the time to fix something that takes more than 5 minutes. You won't guess what I had for supper today. Well, I'll just tell you. I had 2 White Castle cheeseburgers. I know you're going to like that. You know those little bitty cheeseburgers? I stuck them in the oven. Now I'm telling you, they're pretty good. You stick them in the oven, get them good and hot. And I boiled an ear of corn. I let it boil. Well, I cooked it in the microwave while I was waiting for my cheeseburgers. And the first corn I've had this summer, because I'm trying to stay away from the starch and the sugar. And so, where was I going with this story? Okay, I had an ear of corn and 2 little White Castle cheeseburger. Pretty good. Well, I really needed something else, and I reached in the freezer, and I pulled out a little carton like this. What's it called? Caramel Candy Crunch ice cream. Sounds good, doesn't it? Was good. Well, I didn't eat the whole thing. I only ate half of it, which was, hold on there, just 300 calories. Yeah, 300 calories. Well, I won't be going back for ice cream for a few days. We'll just put that aside and I'll get on with my story. My story goes way back to when I was a little girl. Got sticky fingers. Daddy was building an elementary school, and I may have told you part of this story before, but that's okay. You can hear it again. He was building the elementary school in Campton, Kentucky. And it was the beginning of summer, and so Mama decided he had rented a house there, and she was going to take us kids, and which been the summer in Campton. He'd rented a house from a young dentist who had joined the Army, and his wife was working in Lexington, so they rented their house to us. Now, I describe the house because it's one of the most memorable things from my childhood that I can think of that would remind you of a Walt Disney movie. I'm talking about the grandmother and Burl Ives playing his little fiddle, or whatever that thing was, ukulele, singing Lavender Blue, and the little boy and the little girl with their lambs, and you know, that kind of movie that's so heartwarming. You just gotta be a part of it. And so, anyway, we moved into this house. It was probably Queen Anne style, great big yard. It had wraparound porch. Now, we never lived in a house with a wraparound porch with those big balusters that were like you see in the rich kid movies. Yeah, that's the only time we ever saw things like that was in movies. This one had the wraparound porch, and boy, did my sister and I love that. We could play on those porches all day long. We had a big front yard with tall trees right on the edge of the road. The road was a dirt road, main road through the town. And there we were out in the yard, playing with our dolls, you know, and our paper dolls and things in the grass. Somehow I think I've told you this story before, but I'm going to keep going with it. We're sitting there on the grass, and it starts getting a little bit windy. Our paper dolls are starting to blow away, and we're trying to grab them, bring them back. And we looked up, and oh, the sky was black. The clouds were rolling. Scary. It scared us. And we're grabbing for our dolls and things, trying to get them up and running to the house. There were about 6 steps up the front of the house. My sister was ahead of me. She got to the step before I did. I couldn't make any headway. The wind was pushing me back, pushing me. I couldn't get forward, and I was trying so hard. And all of a sudden, I was going backwards. I could feel myself moving backwards, and my feet had come off the ground. Now, if you've never had that happen, you don't know how scary that can be, no matter what age you are. I was only 6 years old. The wind was so strong, it had picked me up off the ground and was taking me back down this long sidewalk that we had in front of our house. And I couldn't breathe. It was hitting me in the face. And all of a sudden, I felt something hard go around my waist. What happened? What was that? What I didn't know was that Daddy was coming up the sidewalk just about that time and came up behind me and grabbed his arm around my waist and carried me up the sidewalk and into the house. Now, that's my experience with wind, and wasn't a tornado, but it was a bad storm. But that's not the part of the story I want to tell you. The house we were living in that summer wasn't anything like the one we lived in at home. This one had a living room and dining room with French doors between the two. Now again, we never lived in a house that had French doors. That was classy, really classy. And there were Oriental rugs on the floor. The couple had left the rugs. They'd left 2 or 3 pieces of furniture. And one of the pieces of furniture was a highboy desk. Oh gosh, was it pretty. Mahogany desk. You know, one of those that had that flip top that you pull down and where your writing desk, glass front doors. my sister would get her little tablets and her pencils and her crayons, and she would sit at that little desk, and it was just like she was living in a dream world. All right. This house was everything that we could have dreamed of, except for one thing. It didn't have indoor plumbing. We had an outhouse just a few yards from the back door, but it was a two-holer that, you know, we could go two at a time when we needed to. And my older sister, of course, I had to go to the bathroom before bedtime, and it would be dark, and I couldn't go out to the outhouse unless somebody went with me. So, oh boy, that was her job. She had to take me to the outhouse at night before we went to bed. She wasn't happy about that at all. Well, I wasn't happy either, because, you know, you get out there in that dark outhouse and you look up and there's a big old black spider up in the corner with a spider web. You're not going to hang around very long. So anyway, that was the disadvantage to our pretty Queen Anne house. We went to church in that little town, just down the street. Anything we did, we could walk. And so on Sundays, we would go to church, come home. Mama would cook dinner. Always had a good cooked dinner on Sundays. And when dinner was over and got the dishes washed, she was going somewhere. Well, I wanted to go with her. I said, Mama, can I go with you? Okay, yeah, that was fine. She'd taken her apron off and powdered her face a little bit and got her Sunday hat, put it on, and off we went, walking down the road. Now, I didn't realize the river was right down the road. Now, the place we were going was to a baptizing. Have you ever been to a baptizing in the river? I'd say a lot of you younger folks have never seen a baptizing in the river. Well, I hadn't either, but I was only 6 years old and didn't even know what it was. We got down to the river's edge. It was in a cove, dipped in, you know, where it was quiet and the water was smooth. And a lot of people were there. They were dressed in their Sunday clothes, too. And most of the men and boys had on white shirts with the little ties. You know, back then they dressed up on Sundays. They were all standing on the river bank, and they were singing. I don't have to tell you what they were singing. If you've ever been to a baptizing, you know they were singing, "Shall We Gather at the River?" They'd sing it, and they'd sing it again, and finally there was a preacher there. Now, we didn't know anybody, so we were off to one side, and they were a big group of people over here together, and we just stood back watching. Mama didn't make any effort to join the crowd, and I stood beside her, seeing what was going on. I had no idea. What do you do at a baptizing? Then I saw the preacher. Well, I didn't know it was the preacher, but that's what it was. He walked out into the water with his clothes on. Got right out in the middle. And it was shady. Water came up just a little above his waist. I'm standing there waiting. What's he gonna do? And then the singing stopped, and he raises his hand and looks up, and he starts praying. And the crowd's all got their heads bowed. He's holding his arm up, and he prays. He says, "Amen." When he finished, he points to the bank where everyone's standing. And a young man steps forward, steps into the water. He got his clothes on too. He wades out into the water up to his waist, and I'm standing there by Mama just horrified. And I couldn't hear what the preacher was saying, but he was holding his hand in the air and looking up, and then he reached down and he had a handkerchief in his hand, and he put it over the young man's face like this. And the next thing I see is that young man going back. He had dipped him down in that water, scared me to death. And then I saw the young man come back up. And he slowly wades back out of the water toward the bank. Oh my gosh. I've never seen anything like that before. The preacher points again to the bank, the people on the bank. And another person stepped forward, and he steps in the water. What's he doing? He wades out into the water, same way the first one did. Water's up to his waist. The preacher again holds his hand up, says a prayer with his handkerchief. He bends the young man down in the water, holds him there, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, he's going to drown him. He's drowning him. This happened about a third time. By this time, I'm really scared. I've got hold of Mama's dress tail, and I'm scooting around behind her back and peeking around to see what's going on. Because I know the next time that man points to the bank, he's going to point at me. And he's going to make me go out in that water, and he's going to drown me. Mama's just standing there patiently watching, seeing what's going on. She has no idea that this little girl standing there about to wet her pants and shifting her foot from side to side and trying to hide behind Mama's skirt tail. Well, folks, that was my first experience of a baptizing at the river. Now, my next time, I was in high school. This time, I wasn't scared. I knew I wasn't going to be pulled out in the water and that man was going to drown me. So, if you've never had the experience of baptizing at the river, it can be a very special experience. If you ever get the chance to see one or be a part of one, do it. It's an emotional experience. It's something you won't forget. So I've never been to another baptizing at the river because the church I grew up in, they had a baptismal. It's a beautiful baptismal. That's the one where I was baptized when I was 12 years old. And the minister of that church was so handsome. I didn't know a preacher could look that good. So I wasn't afraid with him when he dipped me in the water. But sure enough, for somebody who's scared of water, I thought he was holding me under an awful long time. And I was glad I only had to be baptized once. Because I didn't think I could take being held under the water a second time. I'm sure some of you have had some interesting experiences like that, and they're memorable things. But the Queen Anne house we lived in that summer was probably one of the most memorable things of my childhood. My sisters agree with me. They remember that house too, and they remember the way we would go up the road to Miss Daly's house. She had a little farm, and that's where Mama bought her milk and butter. So my two older sisters would go once or twice a week up the road to get milk and butter. Once in a while, Mama let my other sister and me go with them since we were 6 and 8 years old. She didn't want us going by ourselves. Now, I remember one day we walked through the gate. There were hollyhocks along the fence line. A row of hollyhocks. They were so beautiful. Her flowers were in little patches, you know, rose bushes over here, the hollyhocks, the chrysanthemums and the zinnias. Beautiful, beautiful yard. And Miss Daly, she was one of the sweetest ladies I ever knew. She invited us girls into her house. Now, her house was like one of those little cottages. I think of one movie, I think it was called Harvest Home or something like that, with Greer Garson. And I always remembered that movie because of the beautiful little cottage that she lived in. That's how Miss Daly's house looked. And she had pretty knickknacks and crochet doilies and figurines sitting around. We didn't have things like that in our house. Mama couldn't afford them, for one thing, and we kids were not as careful as you would have to be in a home with things like that. But Miss Daly took us out. She'd already prepared the milk and the butter. We were getting ready to leave. She said, "Come on, girls, I want to show you something." We went out to her backyard. And I don't know how to describe it any other way except it was like a little canal that ran zigzag through her backyard. Narrow, oh, probably 2 or 3 feet wide. I'd never seen anything like it. And floating down through that water was a mother duck and about 5 little yellow baby ducks. I thought that was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen. And she had taken us out so we could see her baby ducks, watch them float and swim up through the canal. Now that's just one of your childhood memories. It may have been a weekend like that. My older brother, he was working in Covington, Kentucky. He had come to visit for the weekend. We're sitting on the front steps, and he got his guitar. He was a very, very good musician. He liked to sing, and he played his guitar. And we sat on the steps while he played his guitar and sang. And all of a sudden, we hear this cloppity-clop noise coming from up the road, and we could hear people yelling. And we looked, and here comes a thoroughbred horse down the road as fast as he could move. 2 men were behind him trying to catch up with him. They weren't having any luck. And we got so excited and a little bit scared because we didn't know anything about horses. But this horse just glistened in the sunlight. It was so beautiful. Came on down the road, past our yard, When we got to the edge of the yard where there was a driveway, the horse turned and came right up in the yard and right up in front of where we were sitting. And the men here, they were coming up the yard too. And my brother jumped down from the steps. He took double steps and he grabbed the bridle on that horse and held on for dear life till the two men came and rescued the horse. It was like something out of a movie. It could have happened in a movie. We didn't go to movies back then. We were too young. But I think of it now. I just picture Elizabeth Taylor in the movie Velvet. Was that the name of the movie? Something like that. Anyway, you know which movie I'm talking about. She's just about 12 years old. And I just think what happened in our front yard was like something I've seen in the movies. And it's kind of nice to think and remember things like that as being a part of your childhood. So, that's your story for today. Not much, but it's just one of my good memories. And I'll bet you anything, I have roused your memory a little bit. I have a feeling you're thinking about something that you did or something that happened when you were a child, just as exciting as what happened to us that day when the horse ran up in the yard and my brother rescued the horse. You have a good evening, and I'm going to have to do something to work off 300 calories of ice cream. See you later.